I just want to acknowledge first that I'm on the land of the Darug and Guringai peoples. So as I begin this Commonweal conversation, I'm wondering what you, the audience, are expecting to hear today or tonight. I wonder if you are asking yourselves, what do mothers, mothering, and or maternity have to do with this exploration on gender talking points? Will Christina simply be talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus? Is it a fraught exercise because Christina would simply be reinforcing the essentialist notions of women as mothers, as reinforced through Mary for centuries? Isn't motherhood the very idea that is constantly used by the church to prevent women from accessing ordination to the diaconate or priesthood? Don't they say, but women's ultimate value is as mothers, and that is why they cannot be priests? Is not the idea of women as mothers promoted through Mary the very reason why feminist theologians like Elizabeth Johnson have rather emphasized for other images of Mary, such as our sister, not just simply our mother? I get it. I even got it when I heard a world-renowned eco-feminist biblical scholar deliver a lecture on reading the Bible with ecological eyes, but avoided the mention, let alone critique of, the image of the earth as a mother. I asked her later why she avoided this, and she simply replied, it was too difficult, and changed the subject quickly. The biblical scholar was a Catholic religious sister. Maybe she thought she didn't know much about motherhood to discuss it as a metaphor, or maybe she, like other feminist theologians, were trying to steer our attention away from Mary's motherhood, which had become the Catholic hierarchy's model for other motherhoods. The church's motherhood, even real womanhood on the ground, and now possibly the earth as a mother with Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. It is really hard to discuss motherhood without ultimately reinforcing these essentialist notions of womanhood and motherhood. That is, that the ultimate value and purpose of a woman is basically her ability to give birth because, hey, she's born with a womb, not a penis. But then what do we end up with? We have a whole body of solid feminist theological work trying to steer the church away from the idea of women as mothers, trying to point out that women are definitely more than mothers, and that they're not necessarily mothers in the physical sense, as in a parent or human being, or even the spiritual sense, something like spiritual mentoring. Despite all this good work by feminist theologians, popes and councils continue to use the mother language, and they reinforce this through the identity of the church as a mother, Mary as a mother, and even saying Mary is a virgin and a mother, which is the archetype for the church's virginhood and motherhood. The church's virginhood is meant to point to its purity, as being holy, whereas the motherhood obviously is about its ability to birth new Christians. It was also used at Vatican II to communicate that the church has this more pastoral agenda because, the church is a mother. It's more pastoral than legalistic. I argue if we who are mothers do not reclaim this mother language from church hierarchy, we inadvertently allow them to continue to use this language for their own purposes. It's not going away, this mother language, especially since Pope Francis has already admitted this is his favorite metaphor for the church, mother. Vatican II Council speaks of Mother Mary in the final chapter of Lumen Gentium as well. And of course, various popes like John Paul II, Benedict, Francis, they always turn to Mary and they always call her our mother. So this mother language isn't going away. So we have this long history of the church as a woman, particularly as a mother, but we also have this tradition of calling her bride and virgin as well. And these are languages, unfortunately, that we can't throw away. These words we can't throw away. So this stuff began with the early church fathers themselves, with Tertullian, who actually said, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." It's a famous line. Basically, anyone who died as a martyr was, a great witness to the faith, and therefore it encouraged other people to become Christians. Therefore, this in turn birthed new Christians. But as the church became no longer the persecuted, but the persecutor, this idea of the mother as someone who martyred, now was someone who birthed Christians not through martyrdom, but through thought and action. As Ambrose said, we Christians couldn't birth Jesus physically, like Mary, but we can birth Jesus in our minds through upholding virtuous values such as piety, prudence, and so forth. So by the time we get to Ambrose, the 4th century, we not only have this trajectory of the church as a mother and the trajectory of Mary as a mother combined into the one trajectory, the one history, but we also have virginity becoming more tied to motherhood. And then afterwards, we have this Mary becoming archetype of the church as a mother, and Mary's sexless motherhood and pure virginity holding up for other women a model of womanhood and motherhood. So what do we have? We began with theological statements to help define the church and its relationship to Jesus Christ, using the metaphors of mother, virgin, bride. But this, in time, became the instruction for the church on what is ideal womanhood and even manhood. So the early church fathers didn't just speak about Mary's motherhood and virginity. They also spoke of her spousehood or bridal relationship to Christ. Yes, you heard me right. Some early church fathers spoke of Mary as spouse to Jesus, but it's a mystical spousehood, not a sexual one. So yeah, it's okay. We're not going to have the problem of Oedipus or incest here, because remember, Mary is a perpetual virgin as well. So before she gives birth to Jesus, while she gives birth to him, and after she gives birth to him, she remains a virgin. As patristic scholar Geoffrey Dunn says, this is a marriage not between Mary and Jesus, but between the divine word and human flesh. So are you starting to see how all this theological language and images placed onto the church and Mary, they're all little pieces of a Jenga puzzle. And if you take one piece away, the whole theological argument falls apart. And this is the very reason why I know that this language, it's not going to go anytime soon unless we find new ones. Fast forward to Vatican II. Mother Church is used to describe the church as the one who births new Christians, nurtures them, and largely is the one who teaches them, because she's the one who holds all the truth. At Vatican II, the mother becomes a symbol of the church's new emphasis on being more pastoral than legalistic than it was at Vatican I. I mean, even the way Vatican I was presented, it had the teaching set out. If anyone does not believe blah, 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 let him be anathema. In other words, if you do not believe this, you are excommunicated. So Vatican I even had this infamous line, extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside of the church, there is no salvation, which I think pretty much summed up the legalism of the church at the time. At Vatican II, we have this new image of the church, as a mother, as a pastoral mother. She's inclusive, and she's less legalistic than Vatican I. So with this Vatican insistence in the use of images of Mary in the church as a mother, we also have this thing called the Marian Petrine principle, created by the German theologian priest Hans Urs von Balthasar, who's largely influenced by the mystic visions of a laywoman and Dr. Adrian von Speer. So the Marian Petrine principle serves a number of purposes. The first is that it gives reason for preventing women from being ordained in the Catholic Church. It's a principle based on the idea that only men, symbolizing Peter, who was given the keys of the church, were made one of the 12 disciples, not Mary Magdalene. So this paved the way for the reasoning Jesus only intended men to be priests. Meanwhile, we have people like Mary and Mary Magdalene. They accompanied Jesus during his ministry, but they weren't made one of the 12. So no, they cannot be made priests. Because, Mary's role was to birth Jesus, not to be his disciple. The second purpose of the Marian Petrine principle is to explain this dual dimension of the church. One side is the pastoral side of the church, and the other side is this legalistic, juridical, or authoritative. So, Mary represents the pastoral and Peter, the legal, because, Mary as a mother, she's pastoral and gentle because, yep, there's no such thing as authoritarian or legalistic or juridical mothers. Third, the Marian Petrine principle helps the church to reinforce the idea of complementarity between men and women, and that there are only two genders. So Mary's role is as a woman, Peter's role is as a man. They work together in this nice, neat picture for the church. If you start suggesting that there are more than two genders, or that complementarity doesn't actually work in between man and woman in that way on the ground, the whole theological argument just falls apart. And then this just creates a bit of a crisis because, how do you explain the church then and its relationship to Christ and its holiness and mandate to make new disciples without using Mother, Virgin, and Bride? So the thing is, it was not long ago that Pope Pius XI's encyclical on Christian marriage called Casti Connubii, which was published in 1930, named the woman's ultimate vocation as mother and wife. Casti Connubii, in fact, spent much of its first part reaffirming the teachings on Christian marriage taught by Pope Leo XIII in this document called Arcanum Divina Spatientia. But that was published back in 1880. So, can you imagine in 1930, the Pope was still reinforcing ideas of marriage and womanhood and manhood from 1880. And I argued in my book, The Church as Woman and Mother, that this image of the woman as mother, was used at Vatican II. But we do get in Mater et Magistra and Pacem in Terris a bit of change on, image on women. So Mater et Magistra was published in 1961, Pacem in Terris in 1963. In Mater et Magistra, women are considered part of the working class. They're part of the weak, but then also the weaker members of society who must be protected. Meanwhile, Pacem in Terris, we have women given support to their choice to work outside the home. And they even acknowledge that there's the feminist movement. But women's roles remain as mothers and wives. That's the ultimate for women. And it's part of their natural dignity. This is, I guess, a contrast from Casti Connubii and Arcanum, where, women weren't even allowed to go into the workforce. Fast forward to 2016. What pictures of womanhood do we get from the Pope? Well, a bit has changed, but not much. In Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis also supports women working outside the home. He highlights their equal dignity. He goes even one step further than Pacem and Terris and affirms women's movements, saying they too have something worthy to say. So that's even better than just acknowledging that there are women's movements. But at the same time, he also reaffirms this maternal role of woman. So what is this maternal role of woman according to Pope Francis? In a speech to the International Theological Commission in November 2023, which is only a year and a bit ago, Pope Francis explains himself. The church is woman. If we do not know what a woman is, what the theology of a woman is, we will never understand what the church is. One of the great sins we have had is to masculinize the church. And this is not solved by the ministerial path. That is something else. It is resolved in the mystical way, the real way. Balthazar's thought has brought me so much light. Petrine principle and Marian principle. This can be debated, but the two principles are there. The Marian is more important than the Petrine because there is the bride church, the woman church, without being masculine. So I want to point out that in the beginning of Pope Francis' papacy, he's already using the church as a mother as his favorite metaphor. But he used it in a way to promote the Vatican II agenda of becoming more pastoral than legalistic, opening its doors to those that appear at her doorstep. In other words, his picture of the mother was this, hallmark picture, loving, forgiving, non-judgmental, and merciful mother. That was back in 2014. Now, he's not given up that image of the mother for the church. But more and more, we are seeing this added dimension to his picture of the church as a mother, evidence in his speech from 2023. We see him confess readily how much he's influenced by the Marian Petrine principle. So now, on top of this hallmark picture of a mother for the church, he's also reinforcing now this gender binarism promoted through the Mother Virgin Bride Church, and used actually since the 4th century by Ambrose and Augustine. So I argue this type of motherhood is really what you call patriarchal motherhood. It relies on the promotion of the good mother myth. Andrea O'Reilly, the founder of Motherhood Initiative for Research and Community Involvement, described this good mother as the perfect white, middle-class, heterosexual, and married mother. She is one who most, if not all mothers, fail to live up to, and one upheld by men who seek to maintain patriarchal culture. That is literally the rule of the father. It not only hides real women and their needs from the center of concern in society, it also normalizes their oppression. This good mother is even upheld by some women themselves who have been formed into this sexist, racist, and classist normative, encouraging their participation and perpetuation of their own oppression. I mean, I was such a woman myself. I hate to say this, but back in my early 20s, in my Bachelor of Theology days, I was going around saying, oh, what's the big deal about inclusive language? Because when I hear men in the liturgy, I hear men and women. I mean, that's it. That's the power of socialization and internalized oppression. So for now, let's return to the idea of the patriarchal motherhood. Andrea O'Reilly explains, patriarchal motherhood causes mother work to be oppressive to women because it necessitates the repression or denial of the mother's own selfhood. As well, it assigns to mothers all the responsibility for mothering, but it gives them no real power from which to mother. Such powerless responsibility, to use Rich's term, Adrian Rich, denies a mother the authority and agency to determine her own experiences of mothering. The governing factors of this patriarchal motherhood include children can only be properly cared for by the biological mother, which we know is untrue. You know, there are other people who parent the children. Mothering must be provided 24/7. Again, unrealistic. The mother must always put her children's needs before her own. Ridiculous. Mothers must turn to the experts for instruction versus turning to her own wisdom. The mother must be fully satisfied, fulfilled, completed, and composed in motherhood. Mothers must lavish excessive amounts of time, energy, and money upon the rearing of their children. And the mother has full responsibility, but no power from which to mother. And finally, mother work, especially child rearing, is regarded as personal, private undertaking with no political import. So we know these are lies, but this is the lies that we are fed. And this is patriarchal motherhood. And they're also the very governing factors forming the perfect mothering imposed by Francis's Mother Church and Mother Mary. The problem of this eternal mother image is also suggested in psychologist Shari Thurder's definition of ideology, where she says, ideology naturalizes and universalizes its subjects, ignoring the historical sedimentation that undergirds the present state of affairs. Ideology thus functions to obscure the notion that ideas and beliefs are particular and local, situated in specific times, places, and groups. To the contrary, it encourages the view that our society's values have no history, but are eternal and natural. See, whenever we hear, you know, the disregard of feminism or feminist theologies, and they're just called ideologies, actually the church or the Vatican is doing just that when they call woman this eternal maternal image, rather than taking seriously women's complexities and nuances as women and as mothers. So in Francis's constant use of mother, in the projection of Mary as a mother, in using this metaphor to present the church as pastoral, really Francis is just reinforcing the good mother image, also reinforcing gender binarism and complementarity, a concept which my colleague Brianne Jacobs will explore with you in depth next month at the next Commonweal Conversations. So it's also, yeah, ignoring the sciences on gender and sexes. And so, you know, there's so many problems to it. So before I present an alternative to patriarchal motherhood, which O'Reilly calls matricentric feminism, I want to briefly point out the example of sexist language used in the church, which utilizes Marian motherhood. So first, I want to say that sexism, that one, I don't need to explain that. You know what that is. But what we might not understand is how sexism works in covert ways today, because obviously overt sexism is not socially acceptable anymore. But someone like Julia Christina Becker says that it actually works in covert and subtle ways. We know this already. So what have researchers done? They've developed new concepts to make sense of these covert ways that sexism works today. And these terms are modern sexism or neo-sexism and ambivalent sexism. Modern sexism happens when you see a denial of discrimination against women, when you see resentment of complaints about sexism, and when you see resentment against special favors for women. So neo-sexism, Becker describes, is a manifestation of a conflict between egalitarian values and residual negative feelings towards women. So like the church can say stuff like, oh, men and women have equal dignity, but then also have these sort of residual negative feelings towards women. They can't be accessing ordination. The problem with modern sexism and neo-sexism is that it masks the existence of sexism, such that efforts made towards addressing the problem are deemed unnecessary, and it results in maintaining unequal gender relations, as well as male privilege. So, for example, I once presented my research on sexism in the church to a theological faculty, and they were mainly men. And their first response to me was, oh, but isn't the Pope putting women leaders in the church already? And I even think they kind of showed that I looked a bit ungrateful because, the Pope was, giving out these crumbs to women. I mean, that for you is modern neo-sexism embodied right there. Meanwhile, ambivalent sexism results from the interplay between structural power, that is, this control over economic, legal, and political institutions, and dyadic power, power that stems from dependencies in relationships. It's composed of both hostile sexism and benevolent sexism. Hostile sexism is that perception that women seek to control men through their sexuality or ideology. Benevolent sexism, in the meanwhile, seemingly presents women positively, yet women only win under this type if they behave according to sexist prescriptions, including maintaining traditional gender roles, being the mother, choosing domestic roles instead of the public role, being the shadows of successful men than being successful themselves, and not seeking to overpower men using their sexuality. So benevolent sexism includes protective paternalism, the belief that women should be protected and taken care of by men. It includes complementary gender differentiation, the belief that women are the better sex and have special qualities that few men possess, but only in ways suiting their lower status. And also heterosexual intimacy, the belief that heterosexual romantic relationships are essential for true happiness in life and that women fulfill men's romantic needs. So because benevolent sexism appears to uphold women, even elevate them above men in certain ways, women themselves can uphold this very system that oppresses them. They can become blind to sexism as a structural problem. They will tolerate gender discrimination and promote this innocuous system that's by aligning themselves with powerful men. So here's the thing that's really, really disconcerting. Many women do not perceive benevolence as discriminatory for their own lives, and they don't realize the harm it causes for women as a category. As a consequence, benevolent sexism deflates collective resistance of women against it by offering them a way of coming to terms with a sexist system individually without having to challenge the structure of the system as a whole. Therefore, whereas hostile sexism is likely to elicit women's rebellion, benevolent sexism often obtains acquiescence and therefore works effectively and invisibly to promote gender inequality. It divides women. Hostile sexism and benevolent sexism work together such that ambivalent sexism becomes socially acceptable. Becker found that those who scored high in hostile sexism and benevolent sexism are actually ambivalent sexists. And they reconcile their hostile and benevolent attitudes by classifying women into the good subtypes, example, housewives, and the bad subtypes, example, career women. So where do we see this in Pope Francis' own words? He said this back in 2013 during a press conference on a plane. He said, as far as women's ordination is concerned, the church has spoken and said no. John Paul II said it, but with a definitive formulation. The door is closed, but on this issue, I want to tell you something. I have said it, but I repeat it. Our Lady, Mary, was more important than the apostles, than bishops and deacons and priests. Women in the church are more important than bishops and priests. Do you see? On the one hand, we have the Pope who affirms priestly leadership is banned for women, simply because they're women. On the other hand, he uses benevolent sexism, specifically complementary gender differentiation, to say women are more than men, just as Mary is more than the apostles. Benevolent sexism in the church is promoted by valuing women for their motherhood through Mary and the church as a mother, and valuing women for their so-called feminine genius, promoted through John Paul II's theology of the body and letter to women, Mulieris Dignitatum, and even Pope Paul's address to women at the close of the Second Vatican Council. To me, feminine genius is just another term for good mother myth, which is the image that lies behind Pope Francis' demasculinization of the church. I will, though, give kudos to Pope Francis because he has begun to put women in places of decision-making in the church. He's even indicated in the final document on the Synod on the Amazon that Indigenous women's leadership is a model for leadership of women in the church. I find this actually quite ironic because Indigenous women's leadership were seen as a threat by Christian colonizers many centuries ago. These colonizers discredited Indigenous women as witches and instruments of the devil, so that people would rather turn to the male Christian priests than these female Indigenous leaders. I can say more on this, but I think I'm running out of time. There's just one final thing that I want to impart to you, the audience, and that's this idea of the matricentric feminism. So French feminist philosophers such as Julia Kristeva and Lucia Irigaray have for decades pointed to the way mothers as symbol and language are used for patriarchal agendas. For Irigaray, mothers are even sacrificed and hidden for patriarchal agendas, while Kristeva argues that mothers, through Mary, are idolized and at the same time hated. So the remedy for the misuse of mothers for patriarchal agendas is to center the mother and have the mother tell her own story, the challenges, contours, and nuances of her life as a mother. This is what matricentric feminism is. As Andrea O'Reilly herself explains, motherhood, it could be said, is the unfinished business of feminism. Matricentric feminism seeks to make motherhood the business of feminism by positioning mothers' needs and concerns as the starting point for a theory and politics on and for women's empowerment. This repositioning is not to suggest that a matricentric feminism should replace traditional feminist thought. Rather, it is to emphasize that the category of mother is distinct from the category of woman, and that many of the problems mothers face, social, economic, political, cultural, psychological, and so on, these are specific to women's roles and identity as mothers. Indeed, mothers are oppressed under patriarchy as women and as mothers. Consequently, mothers need a matricentric mode of feminism organized from and for their particular identity and work as mothers. Indeed, a mother-centered feminism is needed because mothers, arguably more so than women in general, remain disempowered despite 40 years of feminism. My work does not rationalize or defend the need for a mother-centered feminism as it takes it as a given. So thank you for this chance to share my research on mothering language and symbolism in the church. I hope you have found something helpful here.